Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Healing Growth Podcast. My name is Saiton Riga, and this is a podcast where we talk about healing trauma in an African faith context. Today's episode is the one about bitterness. Hi, everyone. If my voice sounds weird, I've got a strange cold, but we move on and we go on. I'm so grateful to have you listening on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Anchor, and Spotify, and for sharing your feedback. Do share the podcast with your friends, rate it, and let us know what you think. We are 9 episodes in, and I would love to hear your feedback and stories on healing. Next week, I would love to read them out on the podcast, so do send them to our email, which is healing.growthpodcast@gmail.com. I'll repeat, healing.growthpodcast@gmail.com. On Instagram, we are healing.growth, and on Facebook, Trauma Healing and Growth. Bitterness can be rooted in thinking that we are stupid for getting hurt. And then, because that is too difficult to face, it becomes entirely the fault of the person who did the thing to you. Now, for sure, there are situations where the person is entirely to blame. And in situations like that, I would say how to handle them is different. But I want to have a look at a different situation, one where we are not willing to acknowledge our own part to play and where we do have a role to play in how things played out. I find in romantic and other situations, we are often unable to have the hard, honest conversations, even when we can see that things are not working, or that there is trouble ahead, or that there are assumptions and things that are standing in the way of the relationship working. The avoidance of this causes a mess of epic proportions due to frustration. Many times, what happens is that we resent the person, and when we think about them and the situation, we start seething in resentment and bitterness. So both resentment and bitterness originate from the pain we go through when we're betrayed, hurt, and have lost something that we treasure. Life has pain, and we all go through suffering, unfortunately. However, when you carry bitterness, these experiences will still steal from us twice: the pain of the original situation and the pain that foments the resentment and bitterness that steals joy and years of your life and colors your every other experience. The true source of bitterness for me is emotional pain. Because if you think about it, with physical pain, it either heals and goes, or is constant but can be felt either in the whole body or in a specific part of the body, which we can point out. With emotional pain, we often just carry it, and it colors every single interaction we have, the way we wake up, how we feel, how we just move in the world. And it creates a problem that we can easily be ignorant of. Sometimes you can see it if somebody is expressing it through grief, through crying and sadness, but many times we hide it in parts of our souls, never facing it or confronting it. Bitterness comes from the intense emotional pain and injury that makes a person freeze in the place of hurt and not be able to move on from it. The Harley therapy site makes a distinction that bitterness can feel worse than anger because we are left feeling helpless. With anger, often there's an action we can take, and we can do something regardless of the eventual perception of the act. But with bitterness, a key aspect of it is a powerlessness, and so we're left reliving the event over and over and over in our minds. In psychology, it is referred to as embitterment. When I was researching on bitterness, I came across something referred to as moral injury. The definition of moral injury is the strong cognitive, which is mental, and emotional response that can occur following events that violate a person's moral code or ethical code. Potentially morally injurious events include a person's own or other people's acts of omission or commission or betrayal by a trusted person in a high stakes situation. It's not considered a life or death situation, but it threatens one's deeply held values and trust. It can cause profound feelings of shame and guilt and lead to alterations of beliefs, which then causes us to have maladaptive coping mechanisms like social withdrawal, substance abuse, and others. This change of your beliefs is what is thought to sometimes lead to depression, suicidal thoughts, and PTSD. Moral injury is also a key root cause of bitterness. One of the key factors around bitterness is the constant replaying of the incidents or incidences in your mind. And the more you think about it and relive it, the more extreme your reactions and behaviors become. Each time you think about it, you become bitter all over again, and then you even have a physical reaction on top of your emotional reaction. We have stereotypes of bitterness, which unfairly focus on older women, told in our cultures often because of the regrets that they may have. And these stories are told as cautionary tales so that we, quote unquote, do not end up in the same way. But I feel like these stories are not reflective of how we have become as an African society because so many things have changed. I think emotional pain and thus bitterness are human experiences. Bitterness affects all of humanity, down to even children, for many more reasons than just romantic relationships gone wrong. We experience emotional pain from unjust situations like bullying, social exclusion, workplace oppression, organizational injustice, loss of jobs, failed relationships, divorces, failed investments and businesses, and much more. Embitterment can occur as a reaction to just the unjust events that then damage the person's life and life values. It can also be associated with a severe impairment of the ability to work or participate in life generally. Socioeconomic status, general mental well-being, and a number of perceived negative life events are all factors that may be related to embitterment. Just to linger on the socioeconomic bit, I would say, because this is something so relevant in an African society, I would dare say that it puts a premium on provision for men having bitterness. We don't talk about it much, we don't recognize it, but I find that because men have such few places to process their sadness, betrayal, and the pain that is caused around work, around business, around just the ability to provide, they have then ended up in situations which I would say are not ideal for them and for those that care about them. I feel that we have come to a place where there's an industry that has commodified bitterness and further imprisons them with a fear of more pain and causing them to operate in a way that is destructive to themselves, those that care for them, and even those who would potentially care for them. If we are honest, the commodification of bitterness and resentment is keeping many of us stuck in cycles that could be lifelong, because it is much harder to admit your own choices when you are stuck in bitterness and you have somebody supporting why you are bitter. The commodification of bitterness by relationship coaches who inadvertently or intentionally teach us how to, quote unquote, not get hurt, or how not to be vulnerable, or how not to simp is rooted in their own bitterness, their own fear of vulnerability, and the situations that happen to them, which we definitely can agree may be painful and unjust, but because they were then unable to move on from the situation and their bitterness, are now creating content around that and entrapping many more by justifying bitterness and actions that are rooted in bitterness. It is dangerous, and it is my hope that people can realize that what they are being sold doesn't protect them, but keeps them forever living in that pain and subjecting their bodies to reenactments of that pain. Psychology Today writer Stephen Diamond defines bitterness as a chronic and pervasive state of smoldering resentment. Smoldering is, when you go and you have a fire and it's blazing. After the blazing flames, the sticks are burning, and they'll be burning for much longer than the blazing flames were. And because smoldering can go on for such a long while, it's the same imagery that bitterness has. Bitterness can be carried on for years, decades, and even longer. He regards bitterness as one of the most destructive and toxic of human emotions. If you're constantly thinking about the ways that you have been victimized and nursing these wrongs, it may define an essential part of you and even take a hold of your personality. And you become a victim of yourself and the story that you have told. This part is important because we sometimes get so used to telling a particular story that we do not stop and ask, is this what really happened? Or is this the version of the story I am comfortable telling because I don't have to face some of the decisions that I made in this situation? The Concordia University Department of Psychology reports that persistent bitterness may result in feelings of anger and hostility, which, when strong enough, could affect a person's physical health. When you harbor bitterness for a long time, it is known to cause biological dysregulation, which is a physiological impairment that can affect your metabolism, your immune response, your organ function, and even physical disease. That's a heavy one right there. Would we be more willing to process our emotional pain and bitterness if we can see the direct effect of it on our physical health and quality of life? It essentially steals life from us in some ways. There is some research on bitterness and longevity, and the research shows that there is a direct correlation between how long you live when you're bitter as opposed to somebody who is able to work through their pain and bitterness and come out with lessons learned and a positive outlook on life. It is a heavy price to pay on top of the experiences that hurt us. And while what happened, with bitterness, you have the power to save yourself by choosing to heal. The imagery I have of bitterness is you getting hurt, possibly a wound on your skin, and then you don't clean the wound. In this analogy, the cleaning could be processing the emotions and happenings with a therapist or a trusted friend, or praying or journaling and facing yourself. When a wound is not clean, it can easily get infected. And then now you have an abscess collecting the pus. Even then, you still have the option of treating the abscess with antibiotics or getting a doctor to drain it and clean it. But if you don't, the greater likelihood is a pus draining into your bloodstream. That right there becomes an even greater emergency. Germs in your bloodstream are referred to as blood poisoning and requires much more advanced treatment. If you're already weakened by other diseases, then this is a big threat to your body and a dangerous one, because if not caught in time, it could lead to an even worse occurrence in your body. As you can see, at almost every stage, there are medical treatments and interventions, but they need to be applied and followed. We don't think of our emotional health like this. We don't think that I've had a lot of life happening to me, I've had a lot of hard things happening to me, and I need to seek treatment or I need to process them and ask myself the hard questions and let out the bitterness that I have been carrying. And sometimes it's not even as complex as we like to make it seem. Taking a day or two off literally taking it off from the office, going to a place where you have silence and where no one can disturb you, to just think through the things that you've experienced, can result in a much better outlook and a lot of healing just from that. I understand that therapy may be out of reach, but in a country like ours, we have so many spaces where you can go and retreat all across the country where you can literally just be with yourself and think through these things and even pray if you would like. But there's so many spaces where you can literally go to just for that peace and quiet to be able to work through the things that you've been carrying in your heart and soul. I understand that one of the other reasons why holding on to bitterness is preferable is that we would often like to avoid feeling shame. The irony is that often the antidote to shame, or shame resilience as Brené Brown calls it, is vulnerability. Talking to people who will empathize and make you feel normal because they too have gone through something similar. Despite the stigma around bitterness, the statistic is that about 2% of the entire human population carries bitterness with far reaching effects. These are so many people that there is a professor who actually coined the term post traumatic embitterment disorder to help treat them. I even found the existence of a test to help gauge if you are bitter. I am all for this because realizing that you are bitter and seeking help is something courageous, and it is my hope that you're able to find the exact help that you need. So, with all of this, where do you start with the healing or having conversations with loved ones who are bitter? Number one, acknowledging that you are bitter, that you have been masking old pain with bitterness. If it is someone that you love, don't accuse them. Remind them that you love them and you care for them and you are on the same team as them. But this bitterness that was a result of old pain is hurting them and you who loves them. The next exercise is noticing your bitter thoughts. What story are your thoughts telling you? Are you still hurt by that thing and need to grieve what happened? It doesn't matter how long ago the thing happened. The fact that you're still in pain is likely because you never grieved. So take your time and grieve. Grieve through journaling, writing down the things that hurt you, the actions that happened, and exploring the situation. Cry. There is no shame in actually grieving because it is a necessary part of healing. I really advocate for journaling because it's interesting how when we write, how much more comes out from us, how much more that we're able to acknowledge as we write. There is an entire book in the Bible called Lamentations, which is about the sorrow and grief and confusion that happened in the wake of the destruction of the city of Jerusalem. If you think about all the wonderful things that God talks about Jerusalem, it's a city beloved to him. And yet it still went through such horrible things. And in that, there's lamentation and grief. If you've never had the okay to grieve and to lament over the things that happened in your life, know this, it is okay. If the creator of the universe has an entire book on lamenting, you as a human being should feel absolutely free to lament all the things that you hoped for that did not happen and the things that happened that you did not want to happen. As you think through the thoughts and what your thoughts are telling you, recognize that you could be shaming yourself for still being there and getting caught up in a guilt-shame cycle, which often happens because people tell us and teach us and we believe that we should be over it already. But if you're not over it, you're not over it. And you can't be over it without healing. So stop shaming yourself. Stop getting so frustrated that you constantly fantasize of a solution, which ideally would not work or would come up with even more collateral damage. Accept the situation as it happened, grieve over it, acknowledge it. There is no shame in that. Seek a therapist who is able to empathize with where you are and then is able to help you work out the deeper issues beyond the bitterness. Another thing to do is to find other ways to fulfill the purposes that you intended to fulfill, or just put them in a box for later. When I finished high school, my dream was to be on radio. I wrote emails, looked for people, did everything I knew how to do. And many times, those were not answered. I finally did get on radio, working on the content and eventually talking about some of the things that I have talked about on the podcast. But it was minus the healing part because I hadn't even started then. This opportunity, however, didn't last, and at the time, I wasn't getting paid. It was also really painful for me to watch friends in my circle get to live out this dream that I had. But I would comfort myself and just tell myself it's gonna happen one day, somehow. I didn't know how. And here we are. It's interesting because in many ways we don't listen to radio like we did back then, but people do listen to podcasts. And here I'm better able to talk about the things I am passionate about and the things that I fully believe in without anyone, say, pushing particular things to me. And so I'm grateful. Just because something has not worked out right now doesn't mean that it may never work out. It may come back to you in another form, in another way, in another opportunity. So it's okay sometimes to put your dreams in a box for later and keep trying to come back to them because the opportunities will come and by then you will be ready for it. It is definitely okay to take the break. Take the break that you need from this thing. Sometimes when you're so focused on making something work, we push and push and push. And we get bitter about it not working. But sometimes what we need to do is disengage and then re-engage later. The break could open your eyes to new possibilities or other ways of doing it. And it is absolutely fine to do so. Finally, examine the story that you're telling and rewrite it. I'm not telling you to lie. But what are the possible positives or the ways that you have grown or the ways you could have made better decisions? What have you learned? What are you taking away from this experience? Even if it is the fact that there are people in this world capable of incredible cruelty. It is a painful fact, but there is another fact that there are people capable of incredible kindness. Working through our experiences helps us to get the wisdom from it and carry that wisdom throughout our lives. And it is helpful for us to be able to process and to come away with this wisdom. Think about how you would like to work through bitterness in your life going forward and in your family. Many of us have unfortunately come from families where bitterness was the order of the day and has caused such great division and issues. And you don't have to continue the legacy of bitterness. You can choose to live your life differently and choose to teach your children and those around you a different way of living. Another thing that's important is forgiveness. I believe that it comes after the processing and working through the journey of going deeper beyond the bitterness to the key issues and working through all of that. I feel it comes much easier once you have processed. And sometimes when there is resistance to it, keep digging. There may be some unexplored emotions and pains around that. Again, forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation, but you can choose to forgive. And also on top of that, forgive yourself. We often forget to forgive ourselves. It's necessary in healing. You're human, we make mistakes. And only when we're able to forgive ourselves are we also able to move past those incidences. I wish you all the best in this brave quest to process your bitterness, and I leave you with this verse. Therefore, I will not keep silence. Let me go over that again. Therefore, I will not keep silent. I will speak out in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. That's from Job chapter 7, verse 11. You can find us on Instagram as healing.growth and on Facebook as Trauma Healing and Growth. Thank you for listening. Please share this podcast with your friends and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. My name is Saiton Rega from Healing Growth. Bye-bye.